Hi, I'm David Butcher, and this is my wife, Wende, and we have 3 children and 9 grandchildren.
We've been married for 42 years, 32 good ones. We'll get into that in a minute. And we've just actually started coming to Glad Tidings. This is our new church home, and we're really glad to be here.
Growing up, we both came from very dysfunctional families. We both had alcoholic fathers. My parents had been divorced. Wendy's family had been separated many times. And we grew up with just a lot of dysfunction in our family, but I had an introduction to Christ at a young age. My grandma was a very saintly, godly woman, and even in their relationship, my grandpa had left her, and so even back then, but Grandma remained very faithful to God throughout that time. And I remember going to her house. Whenever I did, there would be a Bible on the table beside her. If she was in the kitchen, it would be there. And she was just a great godly woman. So she would take my sister and I to Sunday school when I was smaller. And so I did have an introduction at an early age. My mom at the time wasn't a Christian and didn't actually become a Christian until after my grandma died. And then she began taking us to church as well, but I got away from it when I was a teen. And then after marrying Wende, I just began to live a life for myself. I wasn't paying attention to my children or my wife. I was paying attention to a lot of other people and a lot of things. I had committed adultery. And then at 10 years of marriage, we decided we were going to separate, and Wende was going to take the children and go her own way.
I was ready to leave at 10 years of marriage. I had put up with as much as I could take at that point, but I didn't have the spiritual upbringing that David did. I did once in a while attend church with my grandmother, but that was very sporadically, and it really didn't have a big effect on my life. So as far as spiritual things were concerned, I was absolutely a baby. I had no knowledge whatsoever. And so I was prepared to leave because I just couldn't live that way any longer. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't know what I would do when I left. I wasn't even certain that I would have a place to live, but I just knew that I had to take our kids and I had to go.
Yeah, one day as I was driving on the highway home, it was a Sunday morning, I was listening to a radio station out of Ottawa, and a gospel song came on. And it really spoke to my heart, and I thought, that's what I need in my life. And in the car that day, I surrendered my life to Christ and cried for 16 kilometers home. And when I got out of the car, I knew God had done a supernatural miracle in my life. And He had instantly delivered me from cursing, from drinking, from everything, and put a love in my heart for my wife that I'd never had before. Because I had a praying grandmother who always prayed for her children. And even though Grandma had long gone on to be with God, God's faithful to answer our prayers, even after we've left. And the one thing He said to me that day was that I was not to go home and push religion or the Bible or anything on Wende, that I was to allow Him to love her through me. And to that day, that's been a powerful thing that I always remember.
That day was actually our oldest daughter's 8th birthday, and we were going to take her bowling that afternoon when he got home. And so I noticed when he came in the door that there was something different because he was whistling, and that was unusual. Either he would come in and say nothing, or sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. I had no idea where he was. So this day there was definitely something different, and I was intrigued, but also somewhat afraid that whatever was different about him would really certainly be the end of our relationship.
It was shortly after that, about 2 months after that, that I had become the father and the husband that I never was, and that at that time just meant helping Wende around the house, playing with my kids, treating her like the person I should have been treating her like, and found out actually when I began to treat her that way that she was a far better woman than any women that I had ever been involved with before. And God at that point began to grow us together. And after a couple of months, Wende noticed the difference.
So New Year's Eve, December 31st, is my birthday. And so typically we would go out and, like the rest of the world, celebrate my birthday. But we'd go dancing, drinking, typically dancing, drinking, and fighting. That's how we celebrated. And so that was I just expected that would be the plan again this particular year. but God had a different plan.
So we decided that we were going to go to the watch night service in Napanee with my family that New Year's Eve. And when we did, I knew that I had to do something more, because I hadn't told my mother or anyone else other than Wendy what had happened in my life and my surrender to Christ. So when we went that night, I remember the pastor at the end of the evening, just before midnight, he came down and began to play the piano, and he stopped and said, I just feel checked in my spirit that there's someone or someone's here tonight that either want to make a public confession of their faith or they want to commit their life to Christ. And I knew I needed to take that next step and make a public confession of my faith. So as I stepped to the aisle to go to the front and do that, my wife reached out and took my hand and went with me, and we both surrendered ourselves to Christ that night.
So from that point, we began to build a marriage and a relationship that we'd not had before, and really to learn how to be married, because prior to that we were just doing things our own way. But we really got into learning what God had in store for us, and we wanted to raise our children in that way as well, so that they came to know God at the right time for them. And that has made all the difference in our lives. When we're working with couples now, one of the most encouraging things is to find a couple that is sort of like us, maybe in a similar place in their marriage, feeling maybe that they want to call it quits. And we have an opportunity to pour into their lives and to encourage them, and to see that growth happen, to see that change happen is really encouraging to us, as I said, but it also just reaffirms to us that this is what God's called us to now, and that is the plan to work on marriages, to coach people, to train couples, to work with churches, to establish marriage ministries, because we would like to see ongoing marriage ministry year-long in every church in Canada. That's a big dream, but that's something that we would love to see, because marriages are worth saving.
As we look back over our life, and we've talked about it many times, I so regret and was ashamed of some of the things I did before that point in our marriage. But I'm thankful that we serve a God who's forgiving, and His grace covers all of our sin. And He's brought us through so many different things. And when I look back, I think about, man, I am so glad that I did what I did that day driving down the highway and gave my heart to the Lord, because I have no idea where my children would be today, who our grandkids would be, or any of that kind of thing, especially if there's someone sitting here today that are going through similar things, or maybe you're feeling like you're in a relationship and it's going nowhere. I really encourage you to together seek help if that's what you need, but seek Christ first, and when you find Him, you'll be really glad you did.
I think probably I can say at this point in my life that had God not intervened at that point, had David not had that experience in the car that he had, I don't think I would be alive today. And I know that God has brought us through so many more things in the intervening years, but because we trusted Him and because we trust each other, we can also trust our future to Him.